constitution. Kenya has had two constitutions since it gained independence from the British colonial administration. However, the journey to getting this constitution has been tough. Before 1963, the country was governed by rules made by the British colonial government. The rules were discriminative and oppressive. For example, Africans were not allowed to own land and property and were forced to do heavy work for little or no pay. Further, African children were forbidden from attending the same schools as European and Asian children. Nairobi School and Lenana School, for example, were exclusively for the white kids. There are also certain hotels and recreation centers that you will not have visited as an African.
Nevertheless, on 12 December 1963, Kenya gained independence from the colonial government. It drafted its first constitution, which was referred to as Independence Constitution. The Independence Constitution was drafted in Lancaster, UK, after lengthy negotiations with the colonial government. The Independence Constitution upheld human rights. It had a Bill of Rights that protected the lives and properties of citizens. It allowed people to move freely and to live everywhere in the country. It also abolished forced labor, and Kenyans above the age of 18 were allowed to take part in elections regardless of their race, religion, or tribe. However, the political leaders elected after independence changed the constitution. For example, between 1965 and 1967, sections of the Independence Constitution were changed to give power to the president to appoint government officials without any consultations. The president could appoint his deputy, the chief justice, and even high-ranking police officers at will. These appointments largely benefited the president and his family and friends, and ensured that all political and economic power was centralized and controlled by a small group of people. To suppress opposition, sections of the Independence Constitution that allowed for political freedom were removed. Multi-partyism was abolished so that there was only one political party called Kenyan African National Union, KANU. Punitive laws were such as the laws on seditions and treason were introduced to prevent people from speaking against the government. The impact of all these changes was the country was no longer free, equal, and just. This situation led to many conflicts between the government and the citizens. The few people who talked bravely against the government were arrested, detained without trial, or tortured and killed.
The Independence Constitution had been altered several times and with negative effects on the country and its citizens. Kenyans yearned for change in the year 2000. A body called the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission, CKRC, was established. The commission, which was led by Professor Yashpal Gai, had the mandate to draft Kenya's new constitution. To ensure that the opinions of all Kenyans were considered during the constitution-making process, the CKRC went around the country collecting views on what the people wanted to be included in the new constitution. Later, citizens selected and sent their representatives to the National Constitution Conference, NCC, which was a platform for negotiations during the constitution-making process. The NCC had over 200 people, representing members of parliament, religious bodies, trade unions, persons living with disability, that's PLWDS, women, youth, and non-governmental organization, NGOs.
In 2002, the CKRC published a draft constitution which was adopted by the NCC in 2004 as the draft constitution of Kenya. Some people refer to this draft as the Bomas draft because it was adopted at the Bomas of Kenya in Nairobi. The Bomas draft proposed various changes to how the country was to be governed. For example, it emphasized that people are free to form and join political parties of their choice. It also provided for the rights of children and youth, stating that every young Kenyan had the freedom to associate and to be free from cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. Other important provisions of the Bomas draft included that the judiciary, police, and other public institutions will be independent and free from control from any leader or political body. However, while these developments were taking place, the then government came up with a parallel draft called the Proposed Constitution of Kenya. The Proposed Constitution of Kenya is also referred to as the Wako Draft, after the then Attorney General, Honorable Amos Wako, who oversaw its development. The Wako Draft altered various sections of the Bomas Draft to produce the Proposed Constitution of Kenya. For instance, it deleted the previous that protected the rights of minority and vulnerable groups, including women, pastoralists, communities, and persons living with disabilities. Many Kenyans were unhappy with the Wako Draft, and they overwhelmingly rejected the document in a constitutional referendum which was held in 2005.
Kenyans had again failed to get the constitution they wanted. In the years following the 2005 referendum, the country witnessed various political, social, and economic challenges. The economy suffered and many young people failed to get employment. The poverty escalated and communities competed for the few available resources and opportunities in government. On 30th December 2007, the country held a general election. The leading political parties in this election were the Party of National Unity, PNU, and the Orange Democratic Movement, ODM. Toward the end of the voting period, there was widespread dissatisfaction, especially among ODM supporters who questioned the manner in which the presidential election was being conducted. They claimed that there had been incidents of vote rigging and voter bribery in various parts of the country. Consequently, violence broke out in many parts of the country when former President Mwai Kibaki was declared the winner of the 2007 elections.
The post-election violence, which lasted slightly over a month, resulted in death and bloodshed. More than 1,000 people lost their lives, and over 350,000 people were displaced from their farms and homes. Many others were victims of violence, including sexual assault. Private and public properties worth millions of shillings were vandalized as thousands of citizens fled to neighboring countries as refugees. Basic amenities, including hospitals and schools, were also destroyed. The country was on the verge of a civil war. Calm was only restored in February 2008 after eminent people, including the late United Nations Secretary General Honorable Kofi Annan, reconciled the rival political leaders Mwai Kibaki and Raila Odinga. After lengthy negotiations, a peace agreement called the Kenya National Dialogue and Reconciliation Accord (KNDR) was signed and adopted. The KNDR had 4 key agenda items for long-term peace and development of the country. Its 4th-term agenda item recognized the need for a new constitution to address the root causes of conflict amongst Kenyans. The KNDR required the government to establish a team to lead the country in drafting that new constitution for the people.
To implement the recommendations of the KNDR was established in 2009 to steer the country through the drafting process. The committee borrowed a lot from the Bomas draft and also reviewed the provisions of the Wako draft to produce a proposed constitution. Citizens individually and through their representatives were given time to read, understand, and make recommendations on the proposed constitution. A national referendum was then held on 4th August 2010, where a majority of Kenyans approved the proposed constitution. The effort, sacrifices, and determination of many Kenyans were celebrated on 27th August, when the Constitution of Kenya 2010 was promulgated at Uhuru Park in Nairobi.
A trip down memory lane. On 11 February 2003, the government opened the business of Nyayo House in Nairobi for public viewing. Between 1983 and 1966, the building basement was used as a detention center where more than 100 people were interrogated, beaten and tortured by government security agents. For years, the Nyayo torture chambers was home to many political detainees, including teachers, university students, lawyers, doctors, journalists, and civil servants who were accused of opposing the Kanu regime. Survivors recount how they were kidnapped from their homes or places of work and locked up in the dark and cold chambers for weeks with little food or water. Others were severely beaten or subjected to inhuman conditions to force them to confess that they plotted to overturn the government. Many suspects died and disappeared without a trace. Those who survived would be taken to court, where some chose to plead guilty to the false charges of sedition, then return to the chambers. Tens of people were sentenced to life in prison at the Community Maximum Prison, while a few others were executed. The political oppression was highly criticized, including the international community, and in the July 2010, the Constitutional Court awarded 21 former political prisoners Kenya shillings 42 million in compensation for the torture they suffered under the Kanu regime. Further, in May 2015, the court awarded 9 former Kenya Air Force officers Kenya shillings 19 million for their unlawful arrest, detention and torture by the government in 1982. Both courts ruled that the brutal arrest and inhuman treatment of the political detainees were a violation of their fundamental rights and freedoms.
The Kibera slum in Nairobi was a scene of some of the worst violence after disputed 2007 election. John, who was 16 years old at the time, he would spend the night in the thicket and depended on the strangers of water and food. He got to Kibera hungry and tired and was taken to the local government office for office assistance. For Martha, who was 17, the journey was as long as John's, but her experience was equally devastating. Martha and her siblings left their Kayole slum and government camp in Kibera after learning that the local leaders in the area were given assistance to those affected by the violence. John and Martha later met each other at the St. Michael's Holy Unity Academy in Kibera. Thank you.